Hello and welcome to Tank and AFV News. My name's Tom. Today, I've been working on a couple sort of longer, a little more involved videos, but before those are done, I ran into something today that I just thought was really interesting, hadn't seen before. And what it was a patent. I was goofing around looking in Google Patents, which I don't know if any of you have ever played with, but it's a real fun feature that Google has where you can look up keywords and find patent applications from throughout the years, and you can find all sorts of interesting stuff related to tanks and armored vehicles. Although it can be a little tricky trying to figure out what names things are under, but there's still some fun stuff. And today I was looking up things by Gladian Barnes. Now, if you don't know that name, Gladian M. Barnes was a U.S. Ordnance general, a major general, head of the Ordnance Department during World War II. And he was a fairly prolific designer of weapon systems as well. And he was pretty instrumental in U.S. tank development during the war. He was sort of the guy kind of always pushing for new designs and new technology, kind of in opposition a little bit sort of with Army Ground Forces and General Leslie McNair, who was much more concerned with sticking to a reasonable number of weapon systems and tried and true stuff instead of just, going off on a bunch of tangents and producing all sorts of crazy stuff. But Barnes was fairly instrumental in pushing for like the 90 millimeter gun in the, for the M36 tank destroyer and the T-20 program resulting in the M26 Pershing. And did quite a few other things. And you're looking through his patents. There's several pages worth of patents in Google, and some interesting ones. So, for example, the 36 millimeter anti-tank gun he had a role in designing. But there was one that jumped out at me today because it's just simply called Tank. Patent number 2,413,685. Patented in 1947. Although, I noticed there was a few different listings for it, and the oldest one was 1942, which would make more sense. It definitely looks like something that he was probably coming up with a little earlier in the war as they're brainstorming. And I will put up an image. So I have the actual description of the patent right here, but we'll put up an image here on the screen so you can see it. There's three different views, and it's a sight to behold. It's a rather goofy looking thing. My first thought was like, what in God's name was he thinking? But there's a couple things to keep in mind. First, these patent illustrations aren't necessarily they're not a prototype. They're not blueprints of something that's ready to go, and be built. It's more just illustrating an idea, a concept. So that's what he's trying to do with this. I would assume that, anything he was proposing along these lines would be a little more polished looking than this. But the idea behind this, and without really reading the description because it's terribly dull, these patents, the language they're written in is very technical and boring. What his concern is that tanks are getting too heavy. That even by 1942, this race between armor and firepower is going to get out of control, and they're going to end up coming up with unreasonably heavy vehicles from a logistical standpoint. And his idea is that if we build a vehicle where the hull is only large enough for the engine, transmission, and the suspension, which, as you can see in the drawing, it's a pretty small hull. You could armor it fairly well because it'll be quite small and it'll be compact and light. And then the crew compartment will be entirely in the turret. And so you can armor that. You can see in the drawing, at least, it's fairly well armored. Now, I don't know if this crew layout makes much sense because I only see two seats, which is a little troubling because, who's commanding the thing, or two-man tank, that's a little tricky. But the one thing you'll notice, an important part of the patent, is he notes that there is on the driver's seat, which is that sort of raised one there on the side, with there's a little gear mechanism under there, and the role of that is to keep the driver's chair facing forward no matter which way the turret's rotated. And that's sort of an interesting idea, and it's one that sort of reminded me of another vehicle. Certainly, 20 years later with the MBT-70 program, which is the joint program between the U.S. and West Germany to develop a new tank in the 60s, which ended up failing due to cost overruns and technical issues. And that was sort of similar lines. They didn't, put the crew entirely in the turret, but they did or I should say they didn't put the crew only in the turret. So MBT-70, you still have a fighting compartment that's in the hull and turret, but all 4 crew members are in the turret rather than a driver down solely in the hull. And the idea was that they could make a much lower hull that way, and then of course the driver in MBT-70 is situated in a chair that, much like Barnes' idea, always stays forward no matter which way the turret's rotated. And everything I've ever read on the secondary sources just said that during testing the drivers got rather disoriented. It was not a very workable system. So one thing that's kind of fun with the Google patents is if you the way they listed, they go down and they'll list all the other patents that referenced the patent you're looking at. And so I started going through the ones that had referenced this old patent by Gladys Barnes, and lo and behold, there it was, a patent from Herbert Kunze, or Kunz, I don't know how you say it, from 1963, from Henschel, of this. We'll put up the image. I'm assuming this has to be, for the MBT-70 or something very similar. As the 1963 is about when they start coming up with this design and the idea of the driver in the turret. So, it's always sort of fun. Start digging into the stuff. You learn stuff you never knew. I mean, not exactly earth-shattering news. I mean, okay, so some guy in World War II came up with an idea for a rotating driver's seat, but never knew that, the idea originated back then. And then, pop back up again during the 60s with the MBT-70 program. So I'll put up links in the description if anybody wants to go look at these patents. Again, you can waste a lot of time because you start getting into that part where you see other patents that reference it, and you just sort of get lost looking at all the patents and finding all sorts of bizarre stuff. So anyhow, I hope y'all enjoyed this. I thought it was interesting. And we will have some more videos coming up. Subscribe if you enjoyed these, and we will see you next time.